Hello, my name is Damien Sweeney. I'm the Program Coordinator for Comprehensive School Counseling at the Kentucky Department of Education. Welcome to my session entitled How School Counselors Can Address Race-Related Stress and Trauma. This is a part 2. You can find my other session at the ASCA website, ASCA On Air. We've got 3 learning targets today. First, understand the vicious cycle of dehumanization of Black people and other minorities. Second, learn tangible ways you can fight for social justice as a school counselor. And third, understand how to intervene on behalf of Black people and other minority students in school district and school and district policy. First, my inspiration for today's presentation came out of Forward Promise, their piece titled Disrupting Dehumanization. A quick note, you're gonna see different graphics with this acronym BYMOC, which means Boys and Young Men of Color. And while everything that you see will certainly apply to boys and young men of color, I would submit that it also applies to our girls and young women of color as well. Okay, we're gonna start with 2 quotes out of the Southern Poverty Law Center. They did a piece titled Hate at School. Racism appears to be the motivation behind most hate and bias incidents in school, accounting for 63% of incidents reported in the news and 33% of incidents reported by teachers. Most of the hate and bias incidents witnessed by educators were not addressed by school leaders. No one was disciplined in 57% of them. 9 times out of 10, administrators failed to denounce the bias or reaffirm school values. So just as we would tell students, when we see something, we've got to say something. When our teachers are reporting things, when students are reporting things, when we see things or hear things, we've got to do something. We've got to stand up. Okay, that's part of fighting for social justice. I looked at some data out of the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, and the latest data they could provide was from the 2015-2016 school year, where over 50 million students attended. And take a look at this. Black students were arrested the most. So 36% of student arrests in schools were Black students. 37.2% of out-of-school suspensions were Black students. Almost 33% of in-school suspensions were Black students, which consisted of the second highest amount. And then out of 65,040 students transferred to alternative programs, Black students consisted of the highest amount at nearly 45%, while the next highest was white students at nearly 31%. It's not all bad though. You have this incredible opportunity to fight for social justice, right? You get to fight to eliminate barriers, to provide access, to create supports for students who have this history of oppression, this history of discrimination, et cetera. So that's the beauty of your role as a school counselor. And to back you up, ASCA's created ethical standards that just really go in depth on how we should fight for social justice, how we should fight for equity within the policies of our schools and districts, and then also how we should work towards eliminating racism and bias in schools. So check out this piece that they've released, Eliminating Racism and Bias in Schools, because it talks a lot about how your standards are connected to that. The dehumanization of Black people is traumatic, and because it's an ongoing trauma. Racialized trauma is the cumulative effect of racism on an individual's mental and physical health. There are 3 types of stress. So there's this positive stress, which is the body's normal and healthy stress response to a tense situation or event. There's tolerable stress, which is the activation of the body's stress response to a long-lasting or severe situation or event. And then there's this toxic stress, which again, many of our Black students are experiencing. It's this prolonged activation of the body's stress response to frequent, intense situations and events. Out of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, our nation's African-American community is going through an extremely painful experience, pain that has been inflicted upon this community repeatedly throughout history, which we're going to talk about, this historical dehumanization, and then it's magnified by mass media and repeated deaths. So when we see what happened with George Floyd, when we see what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, or we hear about Breonna Taylor, or Trayvon Martin. We are vicariously enduring even more trauma. A policy statement by the American Academy of Pediatrics last year points to some of the effects of racism on children, which include in adolescence, which includes birth disparities and mental health conditions. Youth of color, as I pointed out in my data conversation a little bit earlier, from the U.S. Department of Ed, youth of color are more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts, and trauma born from their interactions with the criminal justice system amplifies the stress. The stress not only magnifies when children of color experience racism themselves, but can be traumatizing when they observe mistreatment of other people of color. So again, what we're seeing in the news and on our news feeds, it's traumatizing us. There's this idea of dehumanization, which I really want to get deep into today. So first, if you are a person of color, right? If you're a person of color, you are hearing negative narratives about people that look like you, that live in the same neighborhoods as you, etc. And these negative narratives can be things like Black people are violent, Black people don't work hard, and the stereotypes go on, but these negative, and so do these negative narratives. So then, after hearing these negative narratives about ourselves, we see with our own eyes these dangerous actions taken toward us, right? With the victims that I mentioned earlier, right? The Trayvon, Breonna, Ahmaud, George Floyd. And because we're hearing these negative narratives, we're seeing these dangerous actions, we begin to internalize harmful feelings. And these harmful feelings tell us, well, society's telling me this, and I'm watching this with my very own eyes. I must be dangerous. I must be violent. I must be a criminal. And we start to internalize these negative feelings so much so that they become destructive external reactions. And these destructive external reactions can look like, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to hurt other people. I'm going to hurt my community. So in terms of racialized trauma, there's all this dehumanization. There's the historical, the cultural and spiritual, the social, the emotional, and the physical. With historical, the negative narratives, it can sound something like this. Your people were dangerous and needed to be tamed. The dangerous actions can look like, taming could only happen through extreme punishment or destruction. Check out the documentary called 13th on Netflix. It's all about that. Harmful internal feelings can say, we can begin to say to ourselves, my history is shameful. I'm afraid of my own people. And then the destructive external reactions, as I've been taught, I tear down what others build. So we're seeing so much online about the oppression over the last 400 years. And understanding this historical dehumanization allows us to better understand how the history of oppression has affected Black people. There are all of these examples throughout history. I mean, I could have taken a whole slide deck to give you examples, but here are just a few, right? Slavery, Trail of Tears, Japanese internment camps, novel civil rights, segregation. And while they didn't all directly affect Black people, they all directly affected minorities. So don't just think about what happened 400 years ago. We need to start asking ourselves these questions. How are Black communities stereotyped today? And how does this connect to historical stereotypes and historical dehumanization? When we talk about cultural and spiritual dehumanization, the negative narratives that we might hear, your culture and spiritual practices are primitive and inferior. And then the dangerous actions that we might see, we are superior to you. So we might see and feel this. We are superior to you. We can erase or diminish the value of your culture and spiritual practices. The harmful internal feelings that we might have, my culture is invisible, irrelevant, and bad. I am ashamed of my cultural identity. And then that can lead itself to these destructive external reactions, which can look like, I assimilate at all costs. I hide my true beliefs or dissociate from them completely. So when the Black culture is seen as inferior, negative, and violent, poor, etc., what does that do to the children of that culture? Okay. In terms of social dehumanization, the negative narratives can sound like your community is broken because it is inferior. It will never thrive. The dangerous actions can look and feel like it is acceptable to withhold and underfund development in your community. The harmful internal feelings can be my community lacks value and strength, we are helpless and beyond hope. Okay? One of the biggest, your biggest tasks as a school counselor is to provide hope. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then the destructive external reactions, I see no point in caring for my community or environment. I will never be good enough. And then take a look at this. More resources are spent incarcerating youth of color than invested in evidence-based programs that enable them to thrive. So again, we've got this system of social dehumanization that can be found throughout our society. Then there's the emotional, right? The negative narratives can sound like you generate and are responsible for your own pain and loss. So now what I'm hearing is all this is my fault. The dangerous actions can look like it is acceptable to suspend empathy and withhold your civil rights. Oh, another Black man died. Oh, there was this terrible thing that happened in a community. Well, we're going to suspend our empathy because that's just what happens in Black communities. Okay. The harmful internal feelings become, we are an inferior people, suffering emotional abuse, pain, and loss is a normal part of my culture. And that leads to these destructive external reactions, which could be, I ease my emotional burdens with drugs or alcohol or whatever negativity I can get my hands on. Okay, so these are examples of this emotional dehumanization. And in nearly every corner of society, Black children are being told that they don't belong and are unworthy. So we've got to figure out how school counselors can counteract these narratives. And then physical dehumanization. So we'll finish this section with this, physical dehumanization. The negative narratives, your lives and bodies are threats, you are expendable. Okay, we're seeing so many Black bodies being hurt, being threatened, being killed. And that suggests that we are expendable. The dangerous actions can sound and it can look and feel like we can inflict psychological and physical violence without consequence. It is deserved and necessary for our safety. The harmful internal feelings, my brothers and sisters' bodies are threats. And in the destructive external reactions, my brothers and sisters can be sacrificed for any real or imagined threat or infraction. Okay, so we see this in our schools through our restraints and seclusion. We see this with our police, with victims of police brutality. We see this within our own communities and against one another. So again, those destructive external reactions. Okay, so this is one reason why Black students may appear to be hopeless. All right, so first, let me start with this. My favorite part of school counseling has always been finding ways, and I was a high school counselor, so I've always, I always lean towards the high school, and my own experience is just that, it's my own experience. All of us have different parts of school counseling that we absolutely love. But for me, as a high school counselor, undoubtedly, it was finding a way to help a student achieve their post-secondary goal, right? Whether that was getting into college, whether that was being a first-generation student getting into college, or getting into the military, or finding that job that they've been seeking, okay? But then take a look at this. Without a concrete roadmap to success, boys and young men of color and girls often lack the internal feelings of worth that enable them to create their own. Okay, I'm going to read that one more time. Without a concrete roadmap to success, we often lack the internal feelings of worth that enable us to create our own pathway to success, roadmap to success. If they have already been seeded with hopelessness, their dreams quickly disappear. Hopelessness is associated with negative outcomes, including violence, depression, school problems, substance abuse, risky sexual behaviors, and accidental injury. Okay, so we've got to find ways to reinforce students and remind them how resilient they are and that they can be successful. But we've also got to be able to provide that concrete roadmap that they're so desperately needing. Okay, so what can we do? Let's do this. Let's be hope dealers. No, I did not. Read it again. I said hope. Kids need a sense of agency. They have to have this subjective awareness of initiating, executing, and controlling one's own volitional actions in the world. So we've got to figure out how we can return hope to our students and remind them that they do in fact have this agency. We can do this by walking the talk, right? I can literally, I've read many books. I used to be an English teacher. I can only quote one line from one book out of everything I've ever read, and that is this line. Kids have razor sharp BS radars or BS detectors, okay? They know when we're real and when we're fake. So if we want to make an impact, if we want to help create equity, we want to return agency to our students or teach them how to become resilient, we've got to be true, right? We've truly got to walk that talk. We've got to be a beacon of hope. We've got to do school counseling lessons, right? Connect those lessons to ASCA mindsets and behaviors for student success. We've got to be visible. One of the first things that you hear, so you work really, really hard to get your master's in counseling degree, and then you finally get hired. And then one of the first things that I heard when I got to my first school is, you're going to be in your office a lot. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of scheduling. There's a lot of meetings. You're going to be in there a lot, and you're not going to be able to help everyone. But I submit to you that I got into school counseling, and so did you, because we wanted to help our students, right? We wanted to find ways to love on them and be compassionate and find ways that we can support them. We didn't get in it for the paperwork. And yes, the paperwork is necessary, but we've got to find ways to be visible, even if that means putting off the emails until after school. Be visible in the hallways, be visible between classes, go in and check on your students, send notes to your students, right? Reminding them that you see them, call home on behalf of your students, reminding your parents that their children, your parents, guardians, or caregivers, that the children that they've sent to you, they are doing it. They are successful. And something that you saw in that classroom with the way that that student interacted with another student prompted you to give them a call just so you could tell them how incredible their child was. Caregivers are sick of getting phone calls about the negative, right? And hearing how their child has done something negative. They need those positive phone calls and those positive reinforcements. You being visible and available is going to do just that. Actively listen with a solution-focused mindset. It is easy. There's so much going on as a school counselor. You've got 100 different hats that you're wearing. It is easy to try to feel like you have to multitask. But again, I submit to you, when a child is in there, in that office with you, an individual child, turn your chair, face them, get away from your computer, put your phone face down on your desk or in your pocket, and actively listen, right? Shake your head when necessary. Show that child that they have your full attention. And then again, use that solution-focused mindset. Facilitate small groups. Again, it's easy to say, well, I wish I could, I've always wanted to, but I've never found the time because of all these other roles that I play. Make it a priority. And if you haven't made it a priority or can't find the time, then talk about it with your annual agreement with your principal. And then utilize indirect student services to offer even more supports for a child who has endured racialized trauma or dehumanization, right? Call and set up meetings with the caregiver, right? Work with teachers to figure out, this is what's going on with Johnny. He's coming in every day and sleeping. Work with that teacher to come up with a different plan. Try and get to the bottom of what's happening with those caregivers. Bring Johnny in and see what's going on. Connect Johnny with a mental health provider if necessary, right? Or other potential role models within the community that Johnny can look up to that might look like him or have experienced similar things as him. But these indirect student services are going to be huge at providing those extra supports for students that have endured this racialized trauma. Also, make yourself vulnerable. I love the self-disclosure technique because through self-disclosing, we can say, hey, I have been there and I get it, okay? And I want to show you that I've been there and I get it. Or we can self-disclose and say, hey, I don't fully understand everything that you're going through, but I'm here to listen and I'm here to support you any way I possibly can. But that vulnerability, that self-disclosure is going to be absolutely paramount in those conversations. And then school counselors are also change agents, but they're change agents because they're data-driven. Remember, there's a difference between data-driven and data-informed. So data-driven means that data is going to drive your practice. It's going to drive your comprehensive school counseling program. It's going to drive you to create change. But data-informed just simply means that you have the data. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's doing anything for that comprehensive school counseling program or that it's driving change. We talk about this all the time in Kentucky. There's ABC data. Our counselors often get overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of data that's out there. But as a counselor, focus on the ABC data: attendance, behavior, and course passing. Figure out, are our policies equitable, right? Does the data show that we have equitable practices at our school? What do we do if it's not, right? Data-driven school counselors can improve school policy. Okay, you have that ability, but you've got to be able to stand up and speak out when you see that something just isn't quite right, and not everybody has access or opportunity to everything. Okay, Black discipline in schools. Teacher reports of discipline issues, the researcher said, arise from a cycle of negative interactions that are influenced by negative social stereotypes between teachers and students. Okay, so there are there's these stereotypes that create these negative interactions. And then when students and teachers both begin school aware of negative stereotypes that label boys of color or girls of color troublemakers, small initial differences can compound. A small initial misbehavior can be seen as more severe by teachers, and children already worried about fairness and disrespect can react strongly to early negative experiences. Then small behaviors and initial mistrust can grow. And so the cycle begins and continues. So I'd like to make a case for restorative justice. Research shows that restorative justice programs have helped reduce exclusionary discipline and narrow the glaring racial disparities in how discipline is meted out in schools. You do have to be careful though. The evidence is a bit more mixed or inconclusive on two other fronts, and those are school climate and student development. A program that, so be careful here, a program that singularly focuses on reducing suspension will fall short in capturing the prevention-oriented and systemic reform goals of restorative justice. Neglecting to explicitly address the role of institutional racial bias in our society is another pitfall. We often talk about this in Kentucky. When something happens, right, we have to acknowledge it first and foremost. History and race matter, a focus on individuals that ignores the structural racism undergirding policies and practices is ultimately not restorative at all. Person action research. Action research would be something that you can look up for that quote and do with students. Instead, Gregory and Evans recommend that restorative justice initiatives encompass not only student behaviors, but also the behaviors of staff, pedagogical choices, and policies. All right, here are some roles in social justice that school counselors can play. So we can't really control the first one, but what we can do is we can address the issues in classrooms, right, with our tier 1 lessons, our school counseling lessons. We should all look at our local school boards and governments and ask if everyone in our community is represented. We should also work to hold local school authorities accountable for school climate and student safety. When we witness harassment, bullying, bigotry, racism, etc., we have to be upstanders. We've got to say something. We've got to stand up. And then people of conscience, regardless of race or ethnicity, must stand up for what is right. So apathy is not an option. Okay. Another incredible piece, the future of healing, shifting from trauma-informed care to healing-centered engagement. I'm speeding up because I'm running out of time. And I really want to get to a song at the end, but healing-centered engagement. Some school leaders believe that the best way to address disruptive classroom behaviors through harsh discipline These schools believe that discipline alone is sufficient to modify undesired classroom behavior, but research shows that school suspensions may further harm students who have been exposed to traumatic events or experiences. So listen to this cool story. One of the young men in the group, named Marcus, abruptly stopped me and said, "I am more than what happened to me. I'm not just my trauma." I was puzzled at first, but it didn't take me long to really contemplate what he was saying. The term trauma-informed care didn't encompass the totality of his experience and focused only on his harm, injury, and trauma. For Marcus, the term trauma-informed care was akin to saying, "You are the worst thing that ever happened to you." For me, I realized the term slipped into the murky water of deficit-based rather than asset-driven strategies to support young people who have been harmed. So with healing-centered, instead of saying what's wrong with you or what happened to you, we're going to say what's strong with you, right? That's strength-based. We can still say what happened to you. That's still good. But we also need to remind students that they have strength, okay? Storytelling, the positive impacts. One of the first stages to healing racial trauma is encouraging youth to engage in racial storytelling. So when they share their personal stories, it's going to help them release negative emotions and counteract the devaluation they experience. Bottom line here is when Black students can relate with other Black students, they can better understand that they're not alone. Quick example, I had a small group of about 8 African-American boys, all in single parent households. All were angry, all were getting in trouble. What we would do is we would listen to a song. For example, "Keep Your Head Up" by Tupac. We would annotate that song, and then that song spurred the conversation. So by talking about some of the lyrics, they could then relate it to themselves. That would create that would lead to a story that they would tell, which allowed other people in the group to say, "Holy cow, it's not just me that's going through this. Other people are going through this." That was a way for them to heal. All right. The illusions of society tell us that there are all of these negative things happening, right, in the Black community. Again, that Black people are this and that. But what they don't tell you is the stories. They don't often tell you the stories of success in our Black communities. This is one of my students who just graduated this year, and she just got a $30,000 scholarship. We need to hear stories and see stories of Black student success, okay? This is something that as school counselors, we need to pump up. This is a student from Louisville Manual High School, actually, and he was on Project Runway Junior. You see here all Black students that have graduated from medical school. Just so many different images of students that are doing things in our communities to better themselves, to better other people. And we need these stories to be seen and heard. And hopefully those stories will dissuade the community from believing only the negative stereotypes and the negative stories that they're seeing and hearing. All right, so let's see. We've got just a couple of minutes. There is an awesome song that I want you to hear called "Home." The lyrics, these are lyrics that really apply to school counselors. "Home, a place where I can go to take this off my shoulders. Someone take me home." That's you. Someone take me home. Show me the way to you. These students are crying out. They need your help. Why doesn't the world fight fair? You can show them that even though the world doesn't fight fair at all times, they still can rise up. There is a brighter day for them. I still ache from trying to keep pace. Somebody give me a sign. I'm starting to lose faith. Guess what, counselors? You get to be that sign. Now I'm so far that it feels like it's all gone to pieces. Tell me why the world never fights fair. Okay? You get to be that hero for them. All right, so let's do this. I've only got a minute or so I'm going to quickly switch over. There we go. Okay. All right, so you're only going to be able to hear a little bit of it, but you'll get the slide deck and be able to listen to the rest at a later time. Home, a place where
shoulders. Someone take me home. Home, a place where I can go to take this off my shoulders. Someone take me home. Lord, I need power through the struggle just to let a little trouble knock me out of my position and interrupt the vision. After everything I witnessed, after all of these decisions, all these miles, feet, inches, they can't add up to the distance that I have been through just to get to a place where even if there's no closure, I'm still safe. I still ache from trying to keep pace. Somebody give me a sign, I'm starting to lose faith. Tell me, how did all my dreams turn to nightmares? How did I lose it when I was right there? Now I'm so far that it feels like it's all gonna be. So tell me, why the world never fights fair? I'm trying to find home, a place where I can go to take this off.
All right, I hate to have to end that super powerful song, but again, I really hope that you get a chance to listen to it. So thanks again for joining my session. I've got the references here for you to check out on your handout. And here's some contact information. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, email me with any questions, or if you need support. And then please don't forget to click on the link provided on the session page to continue the conversation with me in the live Q&A in just a second. Thanks again.